When Nazi Germany launched its forced sterilization program in 1934, they did not start from scratch. They studied what was already working. They looked at the data. They read the reports. The country they admired most was not some distant dictatorship. It was the United States of America. More specifically, it was a single institution tucked into the hills of central Virginia, near the small city of Lynchburg. An asylum that had already been sterilizing its own patients for years. An asylum whose methods would eventually be endorsed by the highest court in the land. This is the story of the Virginia Colony for Epileptics and Feebleminded. It changed the law, it changed the country, and it gave a dictator on the other side of the Atlantic exactly the blueprint he was looking for. The colony opened in 1910 on a sprawling property in Madison Heights, just outside Lynchburg, Virginia. Nestled in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains, it looked like something between a college campus and a farm. Wide lawns, red brick buildings, long corridors connecting ward after ward. It was the largest asylum of its kind in the entire United States. The original idea was straightforward enough. Virginia needed somewhere to put people suffering from epilepsy, which at the time was seen not as a treatable medical condition, but as a mark of permanent defect. By the end of its first year, the colony already housed over 150 men. But very quickly, the mission expanded. The state began sending anyone it considered mentally unfit, anyone labeled feeble-minded, and the colony kept growing. More buildings, more wards, more patients. But eventually, an extensive cemetery formed on the grounds because many of the people who entered this place never left it alive. And that word, feeble-minded, was so vague and so flexible that it could mean almost anything. It could mean a person with a genuine intellectual disability, but it could also mean a woman who had a child outside of marriage, a teenager who ran away from home, a family too poor to support themselves. If someone in power decided you were unfit, that was enough. And once you were inside the colony, getting out was another matter entirely. The man who ran the place was a doctor named Albert Priddy. He was the colony's first superintendent, and from the very beginning he had a plan that went far beyond housing patients. Priddy was a true believer in eugenics, the idea that society could be improved by controlling who was allowed to have children. In his view, the poor, the disabled, and the so-called feeble-minded were dragging the country down, and the most efficient way to stop them was to make sure they could never reproduce. Here is where the story takes a dark turn. Between 1916 and 1917, Priddy sterilized roughly 80 women inside the colony. There was no law authorizing this, no court order, no formal consent. He simply did it, and he labeled the procedures as treatments for something he called chronic pelvic disorder. Nobody questioned it, nobody stopped him, and for a while nobody even knew. But in 1917, a woman named Willie Mallory sued him. She had been committed to the colony against her will, sterilized without her knowledge, and she wanted answers. Priddy won the lawsuit. The court sided with him, but the experience rattled him. He realized that if he kept operating without legal protection, eventually someone would hold him accountable. So he did what powerful men often do when they get caught. He did not stop. He made sure to get the law on his side first. On March 20th, 1924, Virginia passed two new laws on the very same day. The first was called the Sterilization Act. It gave the state the legal power to sterilize any person in a public institution who was found to be, in their words, idiotic, insane, feeble-minded, epileptic, or an imbecile. The process was simple. A superintendent filed a petition. A board reviewed it. The patient and their guardian were notified, but appeals were almost never granted. And here is the part that should stop you cold. No one involved in the process, not the doctor, not the board, not the superintendent, could be held legally responsible for what they did. The second law passed that day was the Racial Integrity Act, which banned marriage between white people and anyone of another race. Both laws were born from the same ugly belief that certain people were genetically inferior and that the state had every right to control their bodies. But Priddy was not satisfied. He had his law. Now he needed something bigger. He needed the United States Supreme Court to say it was constitutional. And to do that, he needed the perfect test case. He needed someone the court would look at and say, yes, this person should be sterilized. He found her almost immediately. Her name was Carrie Buck. She was born in 1906 in Charlottesville, Virginia, to a poor family that was barely getting by. When she was just 3 years old, she was taken from her mother and placed with a foster family called the Dobbs. Her mother, Emma, was committed to the colony in 1920. Doctors diagnosed Emma as feeble-minded, but the truth was simpler and uglier than that. The diagnosis had almost nothing to do with her intelligence. The doctors disapproved of her personal life. She had children outside of marriage, she was poor, she was vulnerable. And in early 20th century Virginia, that was enough to lock someone away. Carrie grew up in the Dobbs household. By all accounts, she was a normal girl. She attended school, she helped around the house. But in 1923, when Carrie was 17 years old, something terrible happened. She was raped by a nephew of her foster family, a man named Clarence Garland. When she became pregnant, the Dobbs family did not seek justice for her. They did not report the crime. Instead, they had Carrie committed to the very same asylum that held her mother. They told the court she was feeble-minded and epileptic. In January 1924, a judge agreed. Carrie gave birth to a daughter on March 28, 1924. The baby girl was named Vivian. The Dobbs family took her in. And Carrie, barely more than a child herself, was sent to the colony in June of that year. Her mother was already there. Priddy looked at this situation, a mother and daughter both inside his institution, and he saw exactly what he needed. If he could argue that feeble-mindedness ran in the family, if he could prove 3 generations of defect, he would have the perfect case to take all the way to the Supreme Court. But there was a problem with Priddy's plan, a problem he either ignored or did not care about. Carrie Buck was not feeble-minded. She never was. What happened next was not a fair trial. It was a performance designed to reach a specific outcome. On November 18, 1924, the case was heard in the Circuit Court of Amherst County, Virginia. The hearing lasted just 5 hours. Aubrey Strode, the same man who had written the sterilization law, presented the case for the state. He called expert witnesses, eugenics researchers, and doctors who all testified that Carrie and her mother carried hereditary defects that would be passed to future generations. And Carrie's own lawyer, Irving Whitehead, was supposed to defend her, protect her rights, fight for her freedom. He did none of those things. He called no witnesses. He offered no evidence in her defense. He barely put up a fight at all. Years later, the reason became clear. Whitehead was secretly a supporter of eugenics himself. He had previously served on the board of the colony. Carrie's own attorney was working against her the entire time. This was a clear betrayal. The most damaging moment came when a Red Cross nurse was sent to evaluate baby Vivian. The child was just a 7-month-old. The nurse looked at the baby and testified that the baby appeared not quite normal. That was it. That was the evidence. A 7-month-old baby, judged defective by a single nurse, used to prove 3 generations of inherited feeble-mindedness. The case moved through the appeals courts. Carrie lost at every level. In the spring of 1927, it arrived at the United States Supreme Court. On May 2, 1927, the court handed down its decision. 8 justices voted in favor of Virginia. Just one, Justice Pierce Butler, dissented. He never explained why. He simply voted no and left it at that. No written opinion, no public reasoning, just a single vote of conscience against the tide. That lone dissent stood apart. The majority opinion was written by Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, one of the most celebrated legal minds in American history, a man many people still consider a hero of the law. Holmes argued that the state had every right to prevent those it considered unfit from having children. He compared forced sterilization to mandatory vaccination, calling it a small sacrifice for the greater good of society. Then he wrote a line that would echo through the decades and across the world, a line about 3 generations being enough to justify what was about to happen to Carrie Buck. That single sentence became the rallying cry of the American eugenics movement. It was printed in newspapers, it was quoted in lectures, and it would eventually be read with great interest in Berlin. On October 19, 1927, Carrie Buck was sterilized at the colony by Dr. John Bell, the man who had replaced Priddy after his death the year before. She was the first person legally sterilized under Virginia's eugenics law, but she would be far from the last. Over the following decades, the colony in Lynchburg alone sterilized nearly 3,000 people. Across all 5 Virginia institutions authorized under the law, approximately 8,000 men and women were forcibly sterilized between 1927 and 1979. And across the entire country, the Supreme Court's ruling opened the floodgates. More than 60,000 Americans were sterilized in over 30 states. 60,000 people, and most of them had no idea what was being done to them until it was already over. If you are watching this and wondering how something like this could happen in a country that calls itself free, you are not alone. Drop a comment below and tell me, did you know any of this before today? Because most people have no idea. And if this is the first time you are hearing this story, hit the like button so more people can hear it too. Now here is where this story crosses an ocean and where it becomes something much larger than one asylum in one state. Because while all of this was happening in Virginia, while patients were being sterilized and courts were ruling in favor of the state, someone on the other side of the world was watching closely and taking notes. While Americans were debating eugenics in their state legislatures, someone in Germany was paying very close attention. In his writings during the mid-1920s, Adolf Hitler praised the United States for what he called its weak beginnings toward a better conception of citizenship. He was not talking about democracy, he was talking about eugenics. He was talking about forced sterilization. He was talking about places like the colony in Lynchburg. When Nazi Germany officially launched its own sterilization program in 1934, it was modeled directly on American state laws. German officials studied the legal frameworks and they read the published reports. A 1929 study on sterilization results from California was cited repeatedly by the Nazi government as proof that the system worked. And it was not just ideas that crossed the Atlantic. The Rockefeller Foundation, one of America's most powerful charitable organizations, directly funded eugenics research in Germany during those years. Between 1934 and 1939, Nazi Germany's hereditary health courts approved at least 400,000 forced sterilizations, 400,000 people in just 5 years. The program grew from there into something far worse. The concentration camps, the gas chambers, the systematic murder of millions of men, women and children across Europe. When Allied soldiers finally liberated the camps and the world saw the photographs, saw the skeletal survivors behind the barbed wire, the American eugenics movement lost most of its public support almost overnight. People wanted to distance themselves from anything that looked like what the Nazis had done. But here is the uncomfortable truth. The American programs did not stop. Not entirely, not even close. Virginia continued to sterilize patients in its institutions until 1979. That is more than 3 decades after the world learned what eugenics could become at its absolute worst. And here is perhaps the most unsettling fact in this entire story. The Supreme Court ruling that started it all, the decision in Buck versus Bell, has never been overturned. It is still technically part of American law. No court has ever officially said it was wrong. Now, about Carrie Buck, about the girl at the center of all of this. There is one more thing you need to know, and it changes everything about this story. Carrie Buck was not feeble-minded. She never was, not even close. Later investigations revealed that she was a perfectly normal woman who had been failed by every single person and institution that was supposed to protect her. People who knew her in the years after the colony said she read newspapers every day. She did crossword puzzles. She carried on conversations like anyone else. Neighbors described her as kind and sharp and completely ordinary. The diagnosis that sent her to the colony, the label that made her the most famous eugenics case in American history, was a LIE from the beginning. It was built on the shame of a foster family that wanted to cover up a rape. It was built on a legal system that never questioned the word of a superintendent. And it was built on a country that had already decided certain people did not deserve the same rights as everyone else. And her daughter Vivian, the baby that a nurse called not quite normal at 7 months old, the child whose supposed defect was used to condemn 3 generations of women. Vivian made the honor roll in elementary school. Her teachers said she was a bright and capable student. She was proof that everything the court had been told was wrong. But Vivian never got the chance to grow up and show the world what the courts had already decided about her before she could even walk. She died of an intestinal illness at just 8 years old. She was buried in a small grave in Virginia, and the lie about her lived on for decades after she was gone. Carrie was eventually released from the colony. She married a man named William Eagle. She lived a quiet, modest life in a small town in Virginia, far from the courtrooms and the headlines. She never spoke publicly about what was done to her. She died in 1983, at the age of 76, in a nursing home not far from where she had grown up. She was buried near her daughter Vivian in a simple grave. Neither headstone says anything about the Supreme Court. Neither one mentions the colony. Neither one tells the world that these 2 women were used as evidence to justify the sterilization of 60,000 Americans. The so-called 3 generations of imbeciles were 3 generations of poor women who had their poverty and their suffering used as weapons against them. The colony itself went through several name changes over the years. It became the Lynchburg State Colony, then the Lynchburg Training School, then the Central Virginia Training Center. It is closed now. The buildings sit quietly in the Virginia hills. In 2002, the state of Virginia placed a historical marker near Charlottesville, acknowledging what happened under the sterilization law. Years later, Virginia established a compensation program, offering $25,000 to each surviving victim. The claims process is still open today through the Virginia Department of Behavioral Health. Some victims came forward, many did not. Many died without ever fully understanding what had been done to them or why. Across the United States, more than 60,000 people were forcibly sterilized under eugenics laws. California alone was responsible for 20,000. North Carolina sterilized more than 7,600 people, including children as young as 10 years old. The stories from those institutions, from the training schools and the state hospitals, are among the darkest chapters in American history, and they deserve to be told. But those are stories for another time. For now, the colony near Lynchburg stands empty. The wards are silent. The long corridors that once held thousands of patients are dark. The cemetery on the grounds holds the remains of people who lived and died inside those walls, many of them with no family to visit, no headstone to mark who they were. Forgotten by everyone except the institution that controlled them. But the ruling that was born from this place, the decision that said the government could decide who deserved to have children and who did not, that ruling is still on the books. It was never corrected. It was never overturned. And the question it leaves behind is a simple one. If the highest court in the country could brand an innocent girl as unfit, and nearly a century later no one has officially said that was wrong, then what does that tell us about the system that made that judgment? And how many other Carrie Bucks are buried in places just like this, their names lost, their stories never told? If these forgotten stories matter to you, and they should, please subscribe to this channel. That way, you will not miss what comes next.